In a sunlit African village, where the air carried the scent of ripening fruit and the laughter of children echoed along the dusty lanes, two sisters lived under the same roof, yet their hearts beat to very different rhythms. The elder, Luma, was a vision of kindness, her spirit radiant as the morning sun that bathed the village in warmth. Every movement she made seemed to carry a gentle grace, from the way she helped the villagers carry their baskets to the patient manner in which she tended the younger children in the community. Her smile was a balm, a subtle light that even the most troubled could not ignore. People often whispered of her goodness, how she seemed to embody the very virtues that the ancestors had once sung about in the songs of old. Her younger sister Zina, on the other hand, carried a storm in her heart. While outwardly she appeared cheerful, the warmth of the sun never reached her eyes. Envy had taken root in her, twisting quiet thoughts into schemes and whispers that no one could hear but the shadows of the house itself. Zina had watched Luma with admiration at first, secretly yearning to be in the glow that seemed to follow her sister wherever she went. But admiration slowly fermented into resentment as she saw the way villagers turned to Luma for guidance, for comfort, and for admiration. The little acts of kindness that came so naturally. Zina's envy, once a quiet flicker in her heart, began to grow with every passing day. She could not help but notice how the villagers' eyes lingered on Luma, how their voices softened in admiration when she spoke, and how their hands reached instinctively for hers in times of need. Each smile Luma received, each word of praise, felt like a tiny stone thrown into Zina's chest, weighing heavier and heavier until it became nearly unbearable. The elders, too, seemed to favor Luma in subtle ways, offering her guidance first, asking for her opinion in matters of harvest, and praising her for even the smallest contributions. Zina's own accomplishments, though no less significant, were met with polite nods at best, leaving her standing in the shadows, unnoticed and increasingly bitter. As the days turned into weeks, the quiet envy Zina had harbored began to twist into dark imaginings. She started to perceive Luma's kindness not as virtue but as a flaunting of superiority, a subtle reminder of all that Zina lacked in the eyes of the village. Every gesture, every compliment, every friendly glance that Luma received was filtered through a lens of jealousy that grew sharper with each passing moment. She began to murmur to herself in secret, rehearsing ways to outshine her sister, to draw attention back to herself, to reclaim the acknowledgement she believed was rightfully hers. Even in moments when Luma merely shared a simple laugh with a neighbor or offered a basket of fruit to a struggling child, Zina's heart would twist in silent rage, her teeth clenched against the injustice of being overlooked. The whispers that floated in the village air, the same air that carried the scent of orange blossoms and fresh clay from the roads, began to affect Zina deeply. The elder sister will inherit the lands, some would say, meaning well, speaking only of family tradition, yet Zina's mind twisted it into a personal affront. They all love her more than me, she whispered to the wind, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. Even the elders, wise and kind, could not see the depth of her resentment, for she had perfected the art of hiding it behind forced smiles and quiet nods. The envy, carefully nurtured in secret, began to grow seeds of something far more dangerous. Zina began comparing every act, every word, and every smile, seeing Luma as the source of her own perceived misfortune. Where once she had followed her sister with admiration, she now stalked the edges of her life with suspicion, imagining slights and conspiracies that did not exist. The villagers, oblivious to the storm brewing within her, continued their innocent interactions, unaware that each nod, each word of praise for Luma fanned the flames of her jealousy. Even within the household, the divide widened. Luma remained unaware of the growing darkness, continuing her acts of care and compassion. She helped prepare meals, tended the garden, and offered a comforting shoulder whenever Zina seemed troubled, never suspecting that her kindness was only intensifying the envy it was meant to soothe. Zina, however, could not bear the sight of her sister's generosity, seeing it instead as a personal affront, a sign of the unfairness of the world. She began plotting quietly, masking her scheming with a veil of obedience and humility, careful to hide the dangerous storm gathering behind her calm exterior. Soon, envy bled into obsession. Zina began noticing trivial differences in attention and exaggerating them in her mind, imagining conspiracies where none existed, convincing herself that Luma's light had to be dimmed for her own survival. She whispered to the shadows in her room, speaking words she would never dare to utter aloud, that she deserved the admiration, the love, the inheritance, and the warmth that Luma had effortlessly received. In the silence of her heart, she nurtured a plan, a seed of betrayal that, once planted, would grow with the unstoppable force of a river breaking its banks. The village, wrapped in its daily routines, remained blissfully unaware that the bond between the two sisters, once strong and shining like the morning sun, was fracturing. Every smile, every praise, every gesture of kindness from Luma became fuel for Xena's envy. The shadows within her heart lengthened, stretching further each day, quietly preparing the ground for a choice that would change the lives of both sisters forever. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson, the seeds of envy had taken root fully. Xena's thoughts were no longer content with mere jealousy. They demanded action, a reckoning that only she could administer. Her gaze lingered on Luma, not with the warmth of affection or admiration, but with a calculated determination. The bonds of sisterhood were fraying, and soon, the quiet African village would witness the terrifying power of envy fully unleashed. Xena's mind, now consumed by envy, churned endlessly with schemes and calculations. She knew she could not compete with Luma in beauty, in grace, or in the hearts of the villagers. No clever word, no subtle act of mimicry could ever elevate her in the same way. The jealousy that had quietly festered within her heart now demanded a drastic measure, one that would finally tilt the scales in her favor. She began to plan in secret, pacing her small room at night, speaking only to the shadows and the whispering wind. Every detail had to be exact, every step carefully calculated, for one misstep could bring ruin upon herself instead of her sister. The object of her scheme was the old village well, a relic of history, steeped in superstition and stories that no child dared to hear alone. Elders claimed it was watched by spirits, guardians of the past who would judge the hearts of those who approached with ill intent. Some said the waters could reveal hidden truths, or trap souls that were impure. To others it was merely a relic, a deep hole lined with stones and moss, no more dangerous than any other well in the village. Xena, however, saw opportunity in its ominous reputation. The well could serve as the perfect stage for her plan, cloaked in secrecy and strengthened by fear. For days, Xena observed her sister, studying her routines, noting the times she tended the garden, the paths she walked when visiting neighbors, and the moments she lingered near the forest's edge. She marked these in her mind carefully, rehearsing her words and gestures until they seemed natural, even friendly. The challenge was to lure Luma without raising suspicion, to ensure that the act would appear accidental or at least unavoidable. Any hint of malice could unravel the entire plan. Xena began subtly steering conversations toward the well. She spoke of its clear water, ideal for washing delicate linens or fetching the freshest water for the evening meal. She reminisced about childhood tales, where the well had been a source of adventure or hidden treasures. Each mention was casual, layered with feigned curiosity and sisterly affection. Luma, trusting and kind, began to show interest, thinking little of Xena's motives. She saw only the opportunity to explore and the chance for shared adventure, unaware of the darkness lurking behind Xena's eyes. The day of execution arrived with a sky heavy and still, the wind barely stirring the leaves. Xena led her sister along familiar paths, offering stories and laughter to mask the tension coiling in her chest. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced a calm demeanor, keeping her voice light and inviting. Luma followed willingly, her faith in her sister's affection blinding her to the undercurrent of danger. When they reached the well, Xena paused, casting her eyes around to ensure no neighbor was near. The water below gleamed darkly, reflecting the sky in ripples that seemed almost alive. She positioned herself at the edge, speaking softly, drawing Luma closer with promises of marvels in the depths and tales of the spirits who once guarded it. The elder sister's voice was a perfect mixture of excitement and innocence, carefully calibrated to entice, to coax, to manipulate. The air grew heavy as Luma leaned over, peering into the shadows of the well, her curiosity piqued by the stories and Xena's seemingly harmless encouragement. Xena felt a rush of fear mixed with exhilaration. The plan was working, and yet a small, persistent voice of doubt whispered in the corners of her mind. The spirits, long rumored to guard the well, seemed to stir in the silence, a subtle shiver running through the air, as if aware of the malicious intent surrounding them. Xena took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, and spoke the final words that would draw Luma even closer. The sisters' steps were tentative, yet guided by trust and innocence. As the shadows deepened around the well, the moment of execution approached. Every heartbeat rang in Xena's ears, a mix of anticipation, fear, and a thrill of dark triumph. She reached out to gently nudge her sister, the action seemingly playful, yet laden with the potential to change everything. In that quiet, tense moment, the old village well, watched by spirits and steeped in legend, became the fulcrum upon which their fates balanced. Luma leaned further over the edge, unaware of the malice that guided her, and the jealous sister waited, her pulse quick, ready to act. Outside, the world continued as usual, the village busy with daily life, oblivious to the sinister plan unfolding in their midst. The well, silent and dark, held the promise of secrets, of danger, and of a future that neither sister could yet imagine. Xena's heart raced as she prepared to tip the scales, to turn jealousy into action. The plan, deceptively simple yet terrifying in consequence, was now in motion. One step, one nudge, and the course of their lives, and the stories whispered for generations, would change forever. The day had begun with an uneasy stillness, the kind of quiet that presses against the chest and makes every sound, however small, seem louder. Xena led Luma toward the old village well with practiced care, her voice soft, full of feigned affection, weaving stories of playful spirits and hidden wonders beneath the water's surface. Luma, trusting and innocent, followed without hesitation, her laughter a fragile, bright contrast to the growing tension in the air. Every step brought them closer to the edge of fate, to the moment that would shatter the bond between sisters forever. As they reached the well, sunlight glimmered on its moss-covered stones, casting dappled patterns across the girls' faces. Luma leaned forward, peering into the dark depths below, her eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. Xena's heart thumped violently, a mixture of fear, excitement and cold calculation coursing through her. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, every word, every gesture, every hesitation, and yet the weight of what she was about to do pressed down upon her like a heavy stone. The spirits of the well seemed to stir, their whispers riding on the breeze, sensing the cruelty coiling in Xena's heart. With a carefully controlled smile, Xena extended her hand toward Luma, pretending to steady her, pretending to share in the excitement of the moment. "Be careful, sister," she said, her voice light, almost tender. "The water is deep, but it holds wonders." Luma's trust was absolute. She leaned closer, peering into the darkness, unaware of the betrayal that was about to strike. Her small, radiant hands clutched at the stones at the edge, her laughter fading into a soft murmur of anticipation. Xena's fingers brushed against her sister's, a feigned gesture of comfort, but beneath the surface, tension coiled like a serpent. In one swift, silent motion, her hand moved with cruel precision, nudging Luma forward. The movement was so sudden, so seamless, that it seemed accidental, yet it carried all the force of intent. Luma gasped, a sound of shock and disbelief, before it transformed into a cry high-pitched, terrified, echoing across the fields and through the quiet village. Time stretched unbearably in that instant. Luma's arms flailed for a moment, searching for a hold that was no longer there. Her eyes, wide with fear, met Xena's for the briefest second, a mixture of betrayal and confusion reflected in them. Xena's own eyes blurred with a tumult of emotions, triumph, guilt, dread, all mingling in the hollow pit of her chest. Yet she remained still as if frozen, watching the inevitable unfold. Gravity took hold, pulling Luma downward into the shadowed depths of the well. Her cry reverberated off the stone walls, a haunting sound that carried across the fields and whispered to the spirits hidden among the trees and rocks. Birds fell silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself had paused to witness the unfolding tragedy. The water, dark and ancient, awaited her arrival, reflecting the sky above and the malicious intent that had sent her there. As Luma disappeared from sight, a strange hush settled over the surroundings. The echoes of her scream lingered, fading slowly into a sorrowful silence that seemed almost unnatural. Xena's heart raced violently, her breath shallow, yet outwardly she appeared calm, composed, a perfect mask over the storm within. The enormity of what she had done pressed on her, but it was accompanied by a perverse sense of relief. Her jealousy had manifested, her plan had succeeded. Down in the darkness, Luma's senses adjusted to the sudden, cold embrace of the well. Water lapped against her skin, chilling and heavy, but strangely alive. She felt a presence in the darkness, the whispers of ancient spirits, the hum of something beyond the human realm. Though betrayed and frightened, she realized she was not entirely alone. The well itself seemed to recognize her purity, her courage, and her resilience, cradling her as if preparing her for the transformation that was to come. Meanwhile, above, Xena lingered at the edge, pretending to search for a lost stone, her gaze darting subtly to ensure no one had witnessed the moment. The villagers were busy with daily routines, oblivious to the act that had just unfolded. Yet somewhere deep inside, a tremor of unease began to creep into her heart, a whisper of the consequences that might follow. And so, in one cruel, silent push, A bond between sisters was shattered, innocence plunged into shadow, and the stage was set for a transformation that none in the village could have foreseen. Luma's cry had echoed across the fields, a warning, a lament, and a herald of the power that lay waiting beneath the darkness ready to rise. The well had claimed her, yet it had also begun to awaken something far greater than the jealousy that had sent her there. The plunge into darkness was disorienting, a moment suspended between panic and shock. Luma's body hit the cold, murky water with a heavy splash, the impact stealing her breath and filling her lungs with icy dread. For a heartbeat, she struggled against the sudden, suffocating weight, thrashing instinctively, until the current beneath the still water seemed to still itself, as if the very well were aware of her presence. She sank deeper, the faint light from above fading into shadows so thick they felt almost solid. But in that crushing darkness something remarkable happened. She did not die. Instead, she felt herself held, cradled in a force that was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Around her, the darkness seemed alive. Faint glimmers of light appeared, not like the sun or moon but tiny flickers, dancing and pulsing like stars caught in water. Whispering voices, ancient and ethereal, echoed softly around her, brushing against her ears in a language she did not yet understand but somehow instinctively recognized. These were not malevolent spirits. They carried the weight of forgotten souls, echoes of lives lost and stories untold. They circled her, forming a protective ring of energy, their light brushing against her skin like gentle fingers guiding her through the blackness. A sense of clarity began to grow within Luma. The fear and shock of betrayal remained, but it was joined by something far stronger, a quiet power, as if the very waters themselves were whispering secrets of resilience and strength. Her tears, which had begun their journey as silent expressions of grief, now shimmered in the dim light, reflecting the spirit's presence and connecting her to a world she had never known. Each droplet seemed charged with intention, vibrating softly, teaching her that sorrow could be transformed into something potent and sacred. The spirit's whispers grew more distinct, weaving into words that she could understand, though their voices were unlike any human sound. "Child of the well, your pain has been witnessed," they murmured. "The cruelty done to you echoes through the world. You have a choice: embrace vengeance or find peace." Luma's mind raced. The idea of revenge burned hot in her chest, a fierce flame stoked by betrayal and suffering. Yet, alongside that fire, a deeper, quieter voice urged her toward calm, a wisdom that whispered of restraint, of careful action guided by purpose rather than blind anger. Strange lights began to gather around her, forming shapes that hinted at figures, not quite human, not quite spirit. They watched her silently, patient and expectant. She could sense their anticipation, a test of character, as if the world above and the hidden world below were both waiting to see which path she would choose. Luma's hands reached out instinctively, feeling the cold water and the warm pulse of energy around her. The currents swirled in response, carrying faint whispers of encouragement, teaching her that power and justice could coexist, but only if wielded with care. Time in the well lost all meaning. Moments stretched into eternities as Luma listened, absorbed the teachings of the spirits. She felt herself changing, not in body but in essence. Her sorrow hardened into focus, her grief transformed into understanding. Each beat of her heart resonated with the rhythm of the well, with the subtle vibrations of the spirits surrounding her, weaving a connection between her pain and the power it could generate. A choice crystallized within her. She would not allow her anger to consume her entirely. She would take the lessons of betrayal, of cruelty, and of the darkness she had fallen into, and transform them into strength and cunning. Yet she would also honor the peace of the innocent, the harmony that must exist even amidst retribution. The spirits seemed to acknowledge her decision, their whispers becoming a soft, affirming chorus. Slowly, a faint glow began to rise from the depths, illuminating her form. Her eyes reflected the shimmering lights, her body poised in a quiet, calm authority. Though the water pressed around her and the well remained attuned to the casual observer, she had been reborn. Luma understood that she now carried a secret far greater than any betrayal, knowledge and power beyond mortal reckoning, tempered by wisdom and guided by choice. In the blackness of the well, suspended between despair and awakening, she embraced the duality of her fate, the shadow of vengeance and the light of justice. The spirit's whispers faded into a steady hum, leaving her alone with her thoughts, her tears now imbued with a potent promise. When she would emerge, she would no longer be merely the girl who had fallen into the well. She would be a force to reckon with, a guardian of truth, and a harbinger of justice that even the cunning sister above could not anticipate. Days passed and the village slowly resumed its rhythm, the shock of the sisters' fall fading into whispered rumors and hushed fears. Villagers speculated about the girl lost to the depths, some believing she had perished, others murmuring that spirits might have claimed her. Yet in the heart of the forest surrounding the well, something stirred. The waters, dark and still beneath the mossy stone walls, began to shimmer faintly, as if touched by moonlight and shadow alike. Ripples moved without wind, and a soft, almost imperceptible hum resonated from the depths, carrying with it a sense of expectancy and silent power. Then, on a quiet morning when the sun was just beginning to warm the village, movement emerged from the well. It began subtly, a hand breaking the water's surface, fingers glistening with droplets that refracted the light in unnatural patterns. The villagers nearby froze, sensing a presence that was familiar yet altered, something that carried the weight of hidden knowledge and unspoken authority. One by one, the rest of her body followed, rising from the murky depths with a grace that seemed both human and otherworldly. She climbed out slowly, deliberately, each step leaving no disturbance in the water around her, as if the very element recognized her transformation and bowed in acknowledgement. When she finally stood at the edge of the well, the villagers gasped in disbelief. She looked like the sister they had known, the same features, the same delicate frame, but everything else had changed. Her hair flowed like water, catching the morning light in ripples of dark bronze and silver. Her skin glowed faintly, a soft luminescence that hinted at the strange forces that had nurtured her in the well. Most unsettling of all were her eyes. They held an eerie glow, a quiet, unwavering light that seemed to pierce through souls, discerning truth from deception, innocence from malice. Her voice, when she spoke, carried an uncanny calmness. It was soft, measured, and resonant, filling the clearing around the well without raising its volume. Each word felt weighted with intention, each syllable holding a quiet authority that made the villagers step back involuntarily. "I have returned," she said, her tone neither angry nor pleading, merely stating a fact as immutable as the river flowing beyond the village borders. The words carried a chill that ran through the crowd, a mixture of awe, fear, and reverence. The villagers could hardly reconcile this being with the girl they had known. She moved with deliberate, unhurried steps, scanning the crowd, her gaze settling on each person with unnerving precision. Some felt their guilt burn in the pit of their stomachs, others felt a sense of relief, and a few, those who had remained distant and kind, felt only curiosity and admiration. She was not the same child who had fallen. She was something more, something the village had never encountered. A living presence that had been tempered by shadow, by whispers of spirits, and by the silent strength forged in solitude. Her presence disrupted the usual hum of village life. Birds fell silent in trees nearby, and animals withdrew to the edges of the forest, sensing the strange energy she carried. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying her hair and garments without rustling the leaves or disturbing the dust of the path. Villagers whispered among themselves, glancing at one another with growing unease. The sister who had betrayed her looked on, pale and trembling, realizing that the quiet cruelty she had enacted had summoned something beyond her comprehension. Though she did not rush to confront, her aura of quiet authority communicated everything the villagers needed to understand. She was changed, and she now wielded power that was both subtle and absolute. The transformation was complete. No longer vulnerable or dependent, she had become the embodiment of consequence, patience, and hidden justice. Her return was not accompanied by screams or chaos. Instead, it was a profound, unsettling stillness. Every footstep, every blink, every motion carried the weight of someone who had endured beyond ordinary human limits and emerged with a deep, terrifying grace. Villagers felt the shift in reality around them. The girl they thought they knew was gone, replaced by a figure whose presence alone inspired awe and caution. As she stepped fully onto the path away from the well, the eerie glow of her eyes swept across the village, settling briefly on her sister. The message was clear. What had fallen and disappeared had returned, and it was no longer bound by fear, weakness, or the expectations of ordinary life. The girl who had been pushed into the well was still here, but she was no longer merely a girl. She had become the keeper of a secret that few could understand, and even fewer would dare challenge. From that day forward, the village would never see her in quite the same way. Her movements, her presence, and even the softest whisper of her voice carried the weight of the hidden truths she now bore, and the knowledge that the consequences of cruelty could rise silently from the depths to confront even the boldest hearts. The return of the girl from the well sent ripples of unease through the village, though no one could yet articulate why. Her appearance was calm and composed, yet an invisible weight seemed to cling to her, pressing subtly on those nearby. Villagers whispered behind their hands, glancing furtively at one another as if sharing a secret dread. Even those who had once ignored the petty cruelties or gossip now felt an instinctive shiver at her presence. The air itself seemed charged, and a quiet tension hung like a storm cloud over the village streets, marketplaces, and homes. Animals, usually unafraid of human presence, reacted strangely. Dogs whimpered and cowered, refusing to approach her. Chickens scattered at her shadow, and birds in the trees fell silent, watching from a distance. Even the river that ran at the edge of the village seemed to move with a subtle hesitation, its currents slower, as if the world itself sensed that something extraordinary had returned to walk among them. This strange harmony of fear and reverence was felt not only by the villagers but by the environment itself. Leaves shivered though no wind blew, the dust along the path refused to rise under her feet. Her sister, the one who had pushed her into the well, felt this shift most acutely. At first, she tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, smiling and laughing as she once had, pretending to live as though nothing had changed. But the calm demeanor of the returned girl unnerved her. Each glance from those glowing eyes carried a weight of judgment that seemed to pierce through deception and bravado. The sister's past cruelty replayed in her mind with vivid clarity, and a sense of impending reckoning began to gnaw at her confidence. Small tremors of panic would course through her whenever the returned girl passed nearby, and she found herself avoiding eye contact, hoping the subtle authority radiating from her sibling might somehow be unseen. Villagers, too, began to notice the subtle changes in the environment. The village dogs that once barked constantly grew quieter, avoiding the girl entirely. Children, who had once laughed and played in the streets near her home, now hesitated when she walked by. The farmers noticed that their tools seemed heavier, that the wind seemed to resist their work, and even the elders, who had weathered many storms and conflicts, could not ignore the quiet but palpable power emanating from her. It was as if the girl's presence had reshaped the very energy of the village, tilting it in a direction of awe and latent fear. The jealous sister's terror only grew as she observed the villagers' reactions. Neighbors began to murmur more cautiously, no longer speaking ill of the girl or of one another. Even casual gossipers paused mid-sentence when her shadow fell across their path. The sister tried desperately to reclaim a sense of control, pretending to go about her daily routines, but every small act of pretense only drew more attention. She felt the invisible eyes following her, eyes that were not merely human but carried the weight of truths too deep for ordinary comprehension. At night, when the village settled into its customary calm, the sister would lie awake, haunted by the feeling that she was being watched. The eerie glow of the girl's eyes lingered in her mind, casting long shadows across the walls of her home. She sensed the silent reproach in every whisper of wind, in every ripple of the nearby river, and in the gentle rustling of leaves. Sleep offered no reprieve. The quiet vigilance of the returned girl reached beyond daylight, a presence that seemed eternal, patient, and inexorably just. Even those who had been kind or neutral toward the girl sensed a change. While they were not afraid of her, they felt a deep respect and cautious reverence, recognizing that she carried something beyond mortal understanding. They whispered among themselves, acknowledging that cruelty had consequences, and that the natural and spiritual worlds were intertwined in ways they could not fully grasp. The village itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable unfolding of events. The jealous sister, aware of her own guilt, could feel the shifting tides of fortune pressing closer. Her attempts at normalcy were hollow, and with each passing day, the invisible presence behind the girl's calm composure became more undeniable. The villagers could not see what she was capable of, but they could feel it in the very air, a warning that justice had arrived, silent but absolute, and that those who had wronged her would soon reckon with the consequences. By day and night, by action and inaction, the girl's mere existence altered the village's rhythm. Fear mingled with awe, caution with admiration, and curiosity with unease. The jealous sister, trapped by her own conscience and the unspoken authority of the returned girl, could no longer act freely. Each glance, each step, each subtle gesture served as a reminder that the one who had been cast into darkness now carried the power to reshape their world, quietly, inevitably, and with precision. The night was thick with anticipation, the village air heavy with moisture from the storm that had been building since late afternoon. Thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling across the hills and through the winding paths between huts. Rain fell steadily, drumming against rooftops and pooling in the mud-brick streets, but the villagers paid little attention to the weather. Something more profound had begun to ripple through the community, a tension, a quiet dread that refused to be ignored. At the heart of it stood the girl who had climbed from the cursed well, her presence luminous even in the dim light of flickering lanterns, her eyes glowing faintly like embers beneath the storm-darkened sky. The village gathering that night had been ordinary in intention, a communal meeting to discuss harvest schedules and repairs, yet as the girl stepped into the circle of lanterns, the mood shifted instantly. People murmured, uneasy, glancing at one another, wondering how she had appeared so suddenly, so unharmed, and yet changed in a way they could not comprehend. The jealous sister, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt her stomach twist with a mix of fear and disbelief. Every instinct screamed at her that the being before them was not merely the sister she had tried to destroy. There was a weight to her presence, a quiet authority, and a resonance in her voice that carried the unmistakable power of the well spirits. The rain intensified, streaking through the trees and pounding the rooftops with a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the village itself. Then, as if carried by the wind, a voice, not wholly her own, began to speak through the girl. It was clear yet layered, like many voices fused into one. The spirits of the well, ancient and patient, had taken residence in her, lending their strength to her form. They spoke of betrayal and envy, of cruelty inflicted upon the innocent, of hearts hardened by jealousy and deceit. Each word was deliberate, carrying weight that pressed upon the villagers' consciences. The villagers shivered, realizing that the whispers and rumors they had once dismissed now had corporeal power. The rain seemed to respond, the wind bending the branches above their heads as though nodding in agreement. The girl's words revealed hidden actions, exposing those who had smiled while the cruelty occurred, those who had participated in silence, and those who had been complicit through neglect. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd. Some tried to deny it, casting furtive glances around as though hoping others would shield them from judgment, but the eyes of the returned girl, glowing faintly with the essence of the well, pierced through every lie. The jealous sister attempted to flee, but the crowd parted instinctively, a mixture of fear and reverence holding them at bay. She stumbled back, tripping over the muddy path as the girl's gaze followed her relentlessly. There was no malice in it, only the quiet, immutable justice of the spirits she carried. The wind seemed to carry the sister's own shame, whipping through her hair and soaking her clothes as if the storm itself conspired to reveal her sins. Every step she took was mirrored by the weight of her conscience, and the villagers watched in awe as the balance of power, once held by envy, shifted irrevocably. The girl raised her hand slightly, and the rain stilled in a small circle around her. Within that quiet space, the spirits' voices intensified, recounting acts of treachery that had been hidden for years. The villagers could see visions of moments long past, the shove, the whispered lies, the silent gleams of envy in eyes that had once appeared kind. Every deceit and betrayal replayed in vivid clarity, and the audience gasped, their own hearts echoing the truths they had long ignored. The voices spoke of consequences, not in vengeance but in awareness. Those who had harmed would carry the weight of their actions in ways unavoidable, their guilt mirrored endlessly by the vigilant eyes of the well. As the storm reached its peak, lightning illuminated the girl's face, revealing a calm and serene determination. Her hair, wet and clinging to her shoulders, framed her glowing eyes like a halo of quiet power. The villagers felt that the well spirits were no longer distant entities but present in the very air around them. Streams of water from the rising storm reflected her form in hundreds of small mirrors along the village paths, each reflection showing not just her visage but the collective conscience of the crowd. Those who had acted cruelly felt an invisible pressure, a heavy, inescapable truth pressing upon their hearts, while those who had been innocent or kind stood with clarity, untouched by the moral storm that raged through the others. The jealous sister sank to her knees, her voice cracking as she attempted to speak, but the words faltered and broke under the weight of the well's judgment. She felt every act of malice replay in her mind, amplified by the spirits, and for the first time truly understood the depth of her wrongdoing. The girl did not need to strike her, nor to curse her. The truth itself became the instrument of reckoning. Every villager who had witnessed cruelty or deceit felt their conscience stir, realizing that the world was larger, older, and wiser than their petty fears and envies. Finally, the storm began to subside. The voices softened, receding like the tide, leaving a profound silence in the village. Water dripped from rooftops and puddled in the streets, but the calm carried a sense of completion, a balance restored by revelation. The girl's presence remained radiant, her eyes still glowing faintly, the well spirit still whispering quietly beneath the surface. Villagers whispered among themselves, acknowledging the truth they had been forced to face, a mixture of awe, fear, and newfound respect settling over them. That night, as the girl walked through the drenched streets, the villagers gave her space, their eyes lowered in reverence. The storm had passed, but the memory of the revelations lingered like the scent of rain on dry earth. Justice had been delivered not through violence, but through the quiet, undeniable authority of truth made visible, and the village understood that the well spirits had chosen wisely. The girl, a vessel for their judgment, had restored balance, ensuring that cruelty could not hide and that innocence was recognized. By dawn, the storm clouds parted, and though the village was soaked and tired, its people carried a new awareness. The girl, now a figure both human and otherworldly, had revealed that the past could not remain buried, that deceit could not hide, and that justice, patient and inevitable, would always find a way to emerge, carried in the voice of one who had been wronged but transformed into an instrument of truth. The dawn was muted, the sun struggling to pierce the heavy clouds that still lingered over the village. A strange hush had settled, a quiet so profound that even the morning birds seemed hesitant to sing. The villagers gathered again, not out of curiosity but out of a mix of dread and obligation. They knew the night before had revealed a power far beyond human understanding, a force tied to the girl who had climbed from the well and carried with her the judgment of the spirits. And now, all eyes turned toward the sister whose envy had set the tragic chain of events in motion, for the time of reckoning had arrived. The guilty sister knelt at the edge of the gathering, her body tense, shoulders hunched and face pale. She could feel the weight of the village's gaze upon her, yet it was not just the villagers' eyes that unnerved her, it was the presence of the girl herself. She stood a few paces away, radiant and calm, eyes still glowing faintly with the essence of the well. It was as if she carried the mountain's patience, the river's inevitability, and the storm's inevitability all at once. Every step the guilty sister took toward the center of the circle felt heavier, as though the ground itself remembered the shove, the betrayal, the cruelty she had inflicted. The memories she had tried to bury deep within herself rose up like tides, relentless and unyielding. The spirits whispered through the girl, a chorus of ancient voices that wove through the morning air. The first words were not loud but they carried weight. The deeds of the heart cannot remain hidden. They surface as rivers rise after rain. The sister felt each word penetrate her chest, a chill sliding down her spine, and a strange, trembling fear that had nothing to do with mortal punishment but with the unavoidable truth. Every moment of envy, every gleam of malice, every whispered lie that had supported her betrayal now stood illuminated, reflected in the glowing eyes of the girl who had become their vessel. The villagers watched in silent awe as the girl raised a hand slightly, and the air thickened with a tangible presence. Suddenly the guilty sister's memories projected outward, not in shadow or mist, but as vivid images visible to all. The push toward the well replayed with uncanny clarity, the way her fingers had gripped her sister's wrist, the cruel smile that had crossed her lips, the fleeting hope in her sister's eyes before she fell into darkness. Every act of jealousy, every deceitful plan, every moment of cowardice was displayed before the villagers. There was no embellishment, no hiding. The truth flowed like water, unstoppable and pure. A hush fell over the crowd. The guilty sister's breath came in short, ragged gasps. She tried to speak, to plead, to deny, but the images held fast in the air, leaving her words hollow and meaningless. The girl, channeling the voices of the well, intoned, "Balance is demanded. No blood, no cruelty in return. Only truth, only reckoning. Witness your deeds as they were and shall remain." The sister's body trembled, not from the chill of the morning, but from the weight of her own conscience pressing down like the heaviest stone. Her soul seemed to crack under the glare of her own misdeeds, and she felt fear like a living, breathing entity coiling around her chest. The spirits' voices continued, guiding the reckoning with precision. They did not shout, they did not curse, but they revealed, layer by layer, the consequences of envy and cruelty. Each action she had taken, each slight and cruel word, was mirrored by the suffering it had caused, not just to her sister but to herself. The guilt was a tangible force, wrapping around her limbs, clawing at her heart and fracturing her pride. Villagers shivered as they witnessed the profound moral gravity. Some felt tears prick their eyes, for they understood the terrifying clarity of truth being laid bare. The guilty sister fell to her knees, unable to withstand the weight of her own conscience. The girl who had climbed from the well approached slowly, steps measured and serene. She did not raise a hand to strike, she did not utter words of vengeance. Instead, she extended her gaze, and the sister felt her own spirit reflected back at her, broken, hollowed by envy and utterly exposed. The silence that followed was oppressive, but it was not cruelty. It was justice. Every villager could feel it, the undeniable, unalterable consequence of wrongdoing without human violence, delivered through truth and fear alone. The guilty sister's sobs broke the final tension in the air. Each cry seemed to carry with it fragments of her soul's awakening, the understanding that envy and betrayal were chains heavier than any punishment could impose. She had seen herself as clever, as triumphant, but now she realized that the only power she had wielded had been in harming another. And yet, there was a strange grace in the girl's calm presence. The reckoning was not meant to annihilate, but to illuminate, to restore moral equilibrium. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light over the rain-soaked village, the spirits' voices began to fade, leaving only the resonant echo of justice fulfilled. The guilty sister remained on her knees, weeping, humbled, and irrevocably changed. The villagers dispersed slowly, carrying with them the lesson that cruelty cannot be hidden, that envy corrodes the soul, and that justice, patient and eternal, will always manifest, sometimes through the most unexpected vessels. Finally, the girl turned, walking toward the remnants of the well, her figure radiant but calm, her eyes now soft yet still luminous. She had delivered the reckoning without bloodshed, without malice. Her power lay in revelation itself. The village would never forget that day, nor the lesson it imparted, that the weight of one's conscience when reflected by truth is more terrifying than any earthly punishment, and that the Spirit's justice is patient, all-seeing, and ultimately merciful to the innocent. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the village in muted gold and silver hues. The air was still, heavy with the residue of the previous night's revelations, a mixture of awe, fear, and relief. Villagers gathered cautiously at a distance, eyes fixed on the well, where the girl who had returned from the darkness now stood. She was calm, her figure serene yet imbued with a quiet, almost otherworldly power. The events of the night had left an indelible mark, the guilty sister broken by truth, the villagers humbled by the weight of justice, and the Spirit's presence still palpable in the soft whispers of the wind. The girl's gaze swept over the familiar landscape, the crooked huts, the forest edges, and the river that reflected the rising sun. Every step she took toward the well seemed to ripple with purpose, the ground beneath her feet glowing faintly as if acknowledging her passage. The water in the well shimmered like liquid silver, catching the first rays of sunlight and casting prismatic patterns that danced across the walls. It was a magical, almost sacred scene, as if the well itself had become a mirror between worlds, a threshold between mortality and something far greater. The villagers held their breath, sensing that this was the final chapter of a story they would carry for generations. As she approached the well, the girl's movements were deliberate, graceful, and imbued with a quiet dignity. She paused at its edge, looking down into the depths where she had once been betrayed, and then back at the village that had witnessed both cruelty and justice. The spirits that had guided her whispered gently through the air, rustling the leaves and stirring the waters around her. These whispers were soft, comforting, yet imbued with authority, affirming that her time among the living world had reached its intended conclusion. There was no anger in her eyes, no desire for vengeance remaining, only a profound understanding of balance, of truth, and of the forces she had become a part of. Then slowly she stepped forward and the water of the well responded. Ripples radiated outward, glimmering with a light that seemed to rise from the very earth itself. The surface shimmered and twisted, forming shapes that reflected her journey, the push, the fall, the voices of the spirits, the reckoning, and the lessons delivered. The villagers gasped collectively as the water began to glow brighter, and a gentle mist rose from the well, curling upward like ethereal fingers reaching for the sky. It was a sight that inspired reverence and fear in equal measure, a reminder that the world of spirits and humans could intersect when the scales of justice demanded it. As she descended, there was no struggle, no splash, only a smooth merging with the water, as though she were dissolving into the essence of the well itself. The ripples expanded, carrying glimmers of her luminous eyes and calm expression outward, leaving traces on the earth, the forest, and the air. For a long moment, the villagers could still see her form beneath the surface, translucent and radiant, before it gradually faded entirely. The water stilled, but the shimmer lingered, subtle yet undeniable, marking the presence of someone extraordinary who had walked among them and had now returned to a realm beyond their understanding. The guilty sister, who had cowered through the night, now knelt silently at a distance, watching in awe and fear. She had witnessed the culmination of truth and justice, and now she understood that the girl who had been pushed into the depths had returned not for revenge, but as a vessel of balance. The villagers, too, began to sense the gravity of the moment. The lesson of cruelty, envy, and reckoning had been completed. Nature itself seemed to honor the vanishing. The wind whispered through the trees, the river's current moved with a strange deliberation, and even the morning birds sang more quietly, as if to respect the solemnity of what had occurred. When the last ripple faded, there was silence, deep and enduring yet filled with meaning. The well remained ordinary in appearance but charged with the memory of a spirit who had returned, judged without malice and vanished. The villagers slowly dispersed, carrying the story in their hearts, understanding that some forces are beyond mortal comprehension, and that justice can manifest in forms both subtle and extraordinary. Children would later be warned, mothers would retell the tale, and the well itself would forever be revered as a portal of balance and power. The girl had vanished, but her presence lingered, a shimmering eternal reminder that the innocent wronged may return, not in wrath, but as the embodiment of truth and justice itself. The well stood at the heart of the village, its dark waters still and deep, a silent sentinel of the events that had transpired. Over time, it became a place of fear and respect, a symbol of both betrayal and the unseen power that had intervened. Villagers whispered among themselves whenever they passed by, casting wary glances at its shadowed edge, reluctant to draw too close. Mothers would clutch their children, warning them never to stray near, their voices trembling with a mixture of awe and dread. Even the bravest men hesitated, sensing that the well was no longer just a hole in the ground, but a threshold between the human world and something far older, wiser, and unforgiving. At night, when the wind blew through the trees and the moon cast silver light across the village, faint murmurs seemed to rise from the well. Those who had once laughed at the bond between the sisters now felt a chill pass over them, as though unseen eyes were watching, as though the water itself remembered every moment of envy, cruelty, and sorrow. Some claimed to hear whispers, a soft, mournful voice speaking of loyalty betrayed and innocence wronged. Others swore they felt eyes upon them, not human but knowing, piercing, and eternal. The elders told tales of the two sisters, speaking of the kind one who had fallen into darkness yet returned, and the jealous one who had tempted fate with her treachery. The children, curious yet cautious, would sometimes dare to peek over the edge of the well during the day, only to retreat quickly when a shadow or a glimmer of movement caught their eyes. Even without seeing anything tangible, they could feel the weight of the story pressing down upon them. They learned, without needing explanation, that this was no ordinary place. The whispers of sisterhood and betrayal lingered in the air, a constant reminder that actions have consequences, that envy and malice are never hidden from the eyes of fate, and that innocence, when wronged, may rise in ways the heart cannot comprehend. Villagers who once doubted spirits or dismissed the power of ancestral guidance began to tread carefully, leaving offerings at the edge of the well, small tokens of respect and humility. Some brought flowers or water, others whispered apologies into the night for the cruelties committed, acknowledging the invisible presence that had long since marked the well as sacred and dangerous. Even the village animals seemed to understand, avoiding the area with a cautious respect, circling the edges rather than drinking from its depths. Time did not diminish the power of the well, it only deepened the mystery. Each season brought new tales of those who dared too close and felt an inexplicable unease, or who dreamt of the girl's glowing eyes staring from the water, silently observing. The well became a lesson in itself, a living monument to the strength of the wronged and the weight of betrayal. No one ventured near without a whisper of caution, and each night, the wind seemed to carry the echo of a story that refused to be forgotten, the story of a sisterhood betrayed and a power awakened. In quiet moments, villagers would speak softly among themselves of the girl who had climbed out of the well and vanished, her presence lingering like a shadow on their lives. They told of the jealous sister, humbled and forever changed, and of the lessons carved into the very air by the spirits who had guided her. And though the well remained dark and silent during the day, by night it seemed alive, a repository of memory, justice, and sorrow. The whispers continued, floating across the village like a gentle, haunting song, a reminder that no betrayal is ever truly buried, and no innocence ever truly lost. Even generations later, when the original witnesses had long passed, the well remained untouched. It was a sacred place, feared and revered, where the echoes of two sisters, one pure, one envious, whispered to those who would listen. The villagers never forgot that the well held more than water. It held the memory of hearts tested, of justice rendered without bloodshed, and of the eternal power of truth. In every ripple, every hush of the wind, and every glimmer of moonlight on its dark surface, the story lived on, a chilling, beautiful reminder that the consequences of cruelty and betrayal could endure far longer than the lives of those who committed them.